Welcome back after the break. You're watching Indus News live from Lahore, and I'm Fiza Jamal bringing you detailed stories. President Hassan Rouhani says Iran will not wage war against any nation. The statement comes after the U.S. announced the deployment of 1,000 more troops to the Middle East amidst rising tensions with Tehran. President Rouhani says Americans have been unsuccessful in their efforts to cut Iran's ties with the world. Chinese Foreign Minister Wang Yi has warned against opening Pandora's box in the Middle East. He denounced U.S. pressure on Iran and called on Tehran not to drop out of a landmark nuclear deal. Acting U.S. Defense Secretary Patrick Shanahan says his country's troop deployment is in response to Iran's hostile intent. Shanahan says Iran's attacks on oil tankers confirm its hostile objectives, which threatened U.S. interests in the region. This comes after Tehran said it will break its uranium stockpile limit agreed under the 2015 nuclear deal within 10 days. The EU says it will consider Iran in compliance with the 2005 nuclear deal unless a breach is proven. Meanwhile, French President Emmanuel Macron has regretted Tehran's threatened uranium enrichment. More in this report.
Iran's threat of renouncing the 2015 nuclear deal and stepping up uranium enrichment has sent alarm bells ringing throughout Europe. But the EU says it will continue to consider Iran in compliance of the deal unless evidence proves otherwise. Defending the EU's position, Foreign Policy Chief Federica Mogherini quoted technical reports of the International Atomic Energy Agency. She said the bloc's focus is to salvage the nuclear pact.
Our assessment on the implementation of the agreement is based on the factual, technically sound assessment and evaluation that the IAEA makes in its reports. And so far, Iran has been compliant with its nuclear commitments.
French President Emmanuel Macron was more vocal in his dislike for Tehran's threat to revoke the deal.
I regret, of course, the Iranian announcement made today, but as the International Atomic Energy Agency has underlined, Iran is respecting its commitments and we strongly encourage it to continue its patient and responsible behavior.
Iran has announced ramping up enrichment of low-grade uranium and exceeding the stockpiling limit in 10 days. World leaders are pursuing Tehran to hold its part of the nuclear deal despite the US pullout and sanctions.
Iran says Saudi Arabia is fueling crisis in the region by resorting to force. Foreign Ministry spokesman Abbas Mousavi says Riyadh lacks an understanding of the region's dynamics. Both sides have been locked in a war of words after attacks on 2 oil tankers in the Gulf of Oman. The United States and Saudi Arabia blame Iran for the assaults, which the country denies. At least 17 people have died after a motorboat sank in rough waters off the Indonesian island of Java. 4 children are among the victims. The overloaded boat was carrying 57 people when it overturned near Madura Island in East Java province. Rescue teams have saved 39 passengers and are still searching for 1 missing person. Indonesia, a vast archipelago, has struggled with transport safety in the past. The country has a history of frequent marine accidents. President Donald Trump says starting next week, U.S. authorities will begin removing millions of illegal immigrants. 12 million immigrants, mainly from Mexico and Central America, live in the U.S. illegally. Trump says the U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement Agency will remove migrants as fast as they come in. The U.S. has also announced it will permanently cut hundreds of millions of dollars in aid to El Salvador, Guatemala, and Honduras. Trump had threatened this in March, asking the Central American countries to stop illegal immigration to the U.S. In Geneva, teachers and young people are protesting outside UN headquarters against the separation of migrant families. A UN human rights panel is looking into allegations of human rights violations at the US-Mexico border. Details here.
American and Mexican activists have condemned the Trump administration's policy of detaining migrant children. The American Federation of Teachers filed a complaint with the UN against the practice last year. A human rights panel is reviewing the charges this week.
Well, this is a year after we have filed the complaint to the UN Human Rights Council, and the Council is going to be considering the complaint this week, and we wanted to make sure that there was an action that complemented that continued to expose the injustice being done, the deprivation being done to children.
The Teachers Federation accuses Washington of separating 2,500 children from their families. It also says the White House failed to reunite families after a court order. A UN Human Rights Council spokesperson says its review of the teachers' complaint will be lengthy and confidential.
Since last summer, we've been able to reunite hundreds. Most recently, we helped to present 29 families at the border to be reunited with their children, to present themselves for asylum and be reunited with their children. And they had been separated for over 300 days. So we know that this is only the tip of the iceberg, and there are still hundreds and maybe thousands of families out there.
Most migrants detained at the US border are fleeing violence and poverty in their home countries. The US government says it's changing the way it vets people who sponsor minors crossing the border alone.
Syria says it does not want a conflict with Turkey. Foreign Minister Walid al-Muallim clarified that in a press conference during a visit to Beijing. Turkey and Syria's disagreement over Idlib province's safe zone have recently led to an escalation in clashes. Over 50 people, including civilians, have been killed in the renewed fighting between the two. The Idlib conflict-free safe zone was agreed upon under the Astana Treaty by Turkey and Russia. Saudi coalition forces have intercepted 2 explosive-laden Houthi drones over Abha city. Saudi media say the attack targeted the city's residential area and airport. Over the past week, Yemen's Houthis have repeatedly targeted the airport in the southern Saudi city of Abha. Rebels claimed responsibility for another drone strike on Abha airport earlier, which was not immediately confirmed by the Saudi-led coalition. Last Wednesday, at least 26 civilians were wounded in a missile attack on Abha airport by Houthis. Meanwhile, the UN has threatened to cut off food aid to Yemen after evidence of Houthis stealing civilian supplies surfaced.
If we do not receive these assurances, then we will begin a phased suspension of food assistance, most likely towards the end of this week. If and when we do initiate suspension, we will continue our nutrition program for malnourished children, pregnant women, and new mothers.
Former Egyptian President Mohammed Morsi has been buried alongside other senior figures of the Muslim Brotherhood in Cairo. Morsi died after fainting following a court session. He was 67. Morsi was a top figure in the Muslim Brotherhood. He was toppled by the military in 2013 after mass protests against his rule and served a 7-year sentence for election fraud. Turkish President Recep Erdogan and the Muslim Brotherhood have blamed Egypt's government for Morsi's death. Amnesty International has also urged Egyptian authorities to investigate the former president's death. Qatar's Emir, the UN, and Human Rights Watch have extended condolences to Morsi's family. Russia says the US is falsely accusing Moscow of violating a nuclear test treaty to cover up its own resumption of full-fledged nuclear tests. Kremlin rejects US accusations regarding Russia violating the Comprehensive Nuclear Test Ban Treaty. Russia's foreign minister said the nuclear testing moratorium has been in effect for almost 3 decades. US allegations of Russia being inconsistent with the zero-yield standard came after both sides renounced the INF treaty. Russia was one of the first countries to ratify the CTBT in 2000 and claims to abide by it strictly. The US has not ratified the Nuclear Test Ban Pact. At least 12 people have died after a 6.0 magnitude earthquake rattled China's southwestern Sichuan province. Over 130 others have been hurt in the disaster. 9 people died in Chongqing County and 3 others in Qixian. The quake was followed by 4 aftershocks. The strongest one was 5.1 magnitude. Over 4,000 people were relocated as dozens of structures collapsed. Earthquakes regularly strike Sichuan, where a powerful 7.9 magnitude quake left over 80,000 people dead in 2008. In the UK, 6 leadership hopefuls will face a second vote in the race to replace Theresa May as Prime Minister today. Candidates who come last or fail to secure at least 33 votes will be eliminated from the contest. Conservative MPs will vote by a secret ballot in the Commons, with a result expected later today. Survivors of today's vote will go on to take part in a live debate. Further ballots later in the week will whittle down the candidates to a final 2. Beginning on June the 22nd, the final names will be put to a postal vote of 160,000 Tory members. Currently, Boris Johnson remains the clear frontrunner in the race after topping the first ballot with 114 votes. It's time for us to take a short break. Don't go anywhere because more detailed stories are to follow. Welcome back after the break. Moving on to our next story. In New Zealand, a court has sentenced the man accused of distributing the Christchurch mosque terror attacks video to 21 months in prison. Philip Arps pleaded guilty to 2 charges of distributing the footage that was live streamed on social media. Arps was arrested in Christchurch 4 days after the alleged gunman, Brenton Tarrant's, marched rampage at the 2 mosques. Arps described the video as awesome and showed no empathy towards victims. Christchurch district judge ruled his actions as a hate crime against the Muslim community. Tarrant's attack killed 51 Muslim worshippers. New Zealand has also tightened its gun laws, banning semi-automatic weapons. Sudan's protest leaders have called for nighttime demonstrations and marches in the capital and elsewhere in the country. The standoff has intensified between the ruling military council and civilians over leadership of a future governing body. Most roads in Khartoum are blocked by barricades set up by activists angered by the June 3rd Khartoum massacre. Fake charity accounts on social media are taking advantage of Sudan's crisis to pull in donations of money and attract followers. Many lie about donating meals to people in Sudan. A few, however, have kept their promises. China's President Xi Jinping will visit North Korea this week as Beijing improves relations with Pyongyang amid tensions with the US. His visit will mark the first trip by a Chinese president to the north in 14 years. Xi Jinping is visiting Pyongyang on the invitation of North Korean leader Kim Jong-un. The visit is a week ahead of the G20 summit in Japan, where US President Donald Trump is expected to meet his Chinese counterpart. South Korea says President Xi's visit will help the early resumption of nuclear negotiations on the Korean peninsula. At least 12 people have been killed as their migrant boat sank off Turkey's western coast. The Coast Guard says 31 others have been rescued. The search and rescue operation launched by the Coast Guard is still underway. The boat was carrying over 40 migrants. Turkey has become one of the main launch points for migrants taking the sea route to the EU. Pakistan's JF17 Thunder has performed impressively in the 53rd Paris Air Show. France's President Emmanuel Macron inaugurated the event. Pakistan's ambassador to France, Moin-ul-Haq, and senior officials of the Pakistani Armed Forces attended the air show. The ambassador praised the strong representation of the Pakistan Air Force and Pakistan Navy at the Paris Air Show. The Pakistan Air Force is showing the JF17 Thunder aircraft in aerial and static display, while the Pakistan Navy is exhibiting its ATR reconnaissance aircraft. In southwest China, 12 panda cubs born last year at Chengdu Breeding Center are learning essential life skills with their mothers. More in this report.
Cuddly cubs wobbling around, tumbling in the grass, and chomping on bamboo attracted crowds of locals and tourists. The lazy giant mother swaying on the swing is no less than a treat to the eyes. Cubs are living with their mother against the regular practice of taking away cubs to make sure mothers can give birth to new cubs. Now, as the giant panda population continues to show signs of stability, cubs can enjoy maternal care for longer. Breeders take care to imitate a wild environment to help cubs master all the skills they will need to survive.
We put bamboo shoots in baskets, and we put bamboo tubes and bamboo on the ground to imitate eating bamboo in the wild. We also set up hammocks and other dangling items to help with exercise.
Meanwhile, 4 giant pandas from the breeding center have become the first pandas to settle down in Qinghai, Tibet Plateau City. The panda house packed with passionate panda fans snapping photos from behind the thick glass window. Qinghai province will launch a series of education activities about giant pandas over the next 3 years.
London's Mayor Sadiq Khan says he wants to make Britain's capital an electric vehicle-only city by 2030. The mayor announced plans for a major expansion of London's electric vehicle charging network. The capital is pushing to be a world-leading zero-emission city. A part of the plan is a one-stop shop for residents to request charging infrastructure from their local council where demand is high. London has more than 20,000 electric vehicles, 1,700 electric taxis, and Europe's largest electric bus fleet. Jetman Yves Rossy has flown over the Dolomites in his jet pack featuring carbon fiber wings. The 59-year-old reached speeds of around 300 km per hour during his flight. Rossy, who is a fighter pilot and airline captain from Switzerland, developed the wing suit system. It has a backpack equipped with airplane-type carbon fiber wings having a span of 2.4 meters and onboard reactors. Often referred to as Jetman, Rossy has presented new versions of his jetpacks in high-profile events around the world. In the world of business, most Asian stock markets rose, but gains were capped by investor caution ahead of a U.S. Federal Reserve policy decision. MSCI's broadest index of Asia-Pacific shares outside Japan edged up 0.6%. Japan's Nikkei has dipped by 0.7%. The Shanghai Composite Index flitted in and out of positive territory and rising by 0.1%. Hong Kong's Hang Seng has done best by rising over 1%, and Korea's Kospi climbed 0.4%. And in the Women's World Cup, Norway and France win their latest round of matches. Norway knocked out South Korea by 2-1, while France took a 1-0 victory over Nigeria. Norway have reached the last 16 of the World Cup after eliminating South Korea by scoring penalties in each half of the match. Norway took the lead after midfielder Caroline Hansen scored the opening goal in the 5th minute. Isabel Herlovsen struck their second penalty early in the second half of the match. South Korea's Yo Min-chi turned in a late consolation from close range. The victory clinches second spot in Group A for Norway. France beat Nigeria by a goal to nil in the last game of their group stage match. Wendy Renard scored a late penalty to move France to the group's top spot. The quarterfinals begin from Saturday. And now we'll give you a quick look at the weather around the globe. These are all the stories in detail we have for you this hour. You can follow up on all of our main stories. You'll find them on our website, indus.news.